Why was she sitting so still when everyone else around her shifted with restless comfort? Why did her eyes keep darting toward the emergency exits, as if she already knew something the rest of them didn't? Sarah Martinez pressed her forehead against the cool plexiglass of seat 13F, the steady hum of the Boeing 757 surrounding her like a lullaby she couldn't surrender to. The sky was calm. Kansas rolled beneath them in endless squares of farmland patchwork greens and browns stitched together by thin roads. Rivers winding like threads of silver. It should have been a simple flight. 5 hours from San Francisco to Washington. Nothing more. But to Sarah, even now, there was no such thing as simple. Her jeans felt stiff, almost alien. The navy sweater her sister had given her for Christmas was soft, but she felt as though she didn't belong in it. Civilian clothes had become costumes. She still sat with the precision of a cadet's shoulders squared, feet flat, hands balanced on the armrests, as though she were waiting for inspection. 2 decades of habit didn't break, just because you traded a flight suit for denim, General. Hayes's words echoed in her head, words that had sent her reluctantly onto this journey. You're done. Martinez, reports filed, squadron safe. I don't want to see you until May. That's an order. An order, the kind that left no room for protest. And so here she was, just Sarah. Not Colonel Martinez, not Phoenix, but even in anonymity, she carried herself in a way that made blending impossible. Jennifer, the flight attendant with streaks of gray in her hair, noticed it almost immediately, the posture, the way Sarah's eyes tracked the exits during the safety demonstration, as if rehearsing them, the way her carry-on had been stowed precise, squared, efficient. Military? Jennifer asked gently, her voice careful, respectful. Sarah hesitated, fingers tightening around the thin airline coffee cup. She wanted to disappear into the crowd, but the truth had a way of leaking out in posture, in presence, in everything. You didn't say Air Force, she murmured. Jennifer's eyes softened. Her own life carried the echoes of service. Her husband, 22 years Navy, now retired. She didn't need Sarah to explain. She already knew the weight behind the silence. Thank you, she whispered, and moved on. For the first time in 18 months, Sarah wasn't in uniform, and yet the ghost of it clung to her, stitched into her skin. Across the aisle, a young mother wrestled with twin toddlers, their energy bouncing against the cabin walls. A businessman hammered at his laptop keys beside her, voice sharp over his Bluetooth headset. College kids behind her laughed too loudly, sharing earbuds, drowning in their own youthful invincibility. Normal life, ordinary, and yet, as Sarah glanced out the window, she realized this was what she had fought for. Not the speeches about freedom and democracy, not the medals that hung heavy in shadowed boxes, but this, the mother's tired smile. The students' laughter, the simple irritation of a delayed connection. She almost smiled, almost, but she had no way of knowing what waited in the hours ahead. Not yet. The first hint came like a whisper of vibration in her bones before her conscious mind caught up. Subtle, wrong. Too deep in frequency to be turbulence. Too persistent to be dismissed. She straightened, hand braced against the window frame. Her instinct screamed. 2 years of combat flying had carved reactions into her nerves faster than thought. She glanced at her watch. 3:47 p.m. 2 hours into the flight, the vibration shuddered again. Coffee sloshed in cups. The businessman muttered an annoyed curse. The young mother pulled her children close without knowing why. And then the captain's voice filled the cabin, steady and practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Minor technical difficulties. The words struck Sarah like ice in her veins. She'd used them herself, words pilots spoke when things were anything but minor. Words meant to calm passengers while your hand shook on the controls. While systems screamed failure, her body tensed. She remembered the sound of her own F-16 engine tearing itself apart over Kandahar, the way her hydraulic systems had died, one by one, until she was left with nothing but instinct and prayer. The cabin jolted, overhead bins rattled, a laptop snapped shut. Somewhere behind her, someone gasped. The metallic screech that followed silenced everything. 3 seconds long. Long enough for Sarah to know. Hydraulic failure, multiple systems. Her eyes swept the cabin. Oxygen masks dropped with a mechanical thunk, swaying like yellow flowers in sudden silence. Children cried. Strangers gripped each other's hands. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't routine. The nose dipped, too sharp, too fast, and in that instant, as chaos bloomed around her, Sarah Martinez felt the shift inside herself, the one she had felt 100 times before. The world slowed, her pulse steadied. Fear became calculation. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She couldn't be, not when 127 lives hung in the balance. Her mind began running checklists, hydraulic distribution lines, manual reversion, differential thrust. Calculations ordinary passengers would never dream of. But to Sarah, they were muscle memory. She had sworn she was only Sarah today. Only a woman in 13F. But Sarah Phoenix Martinez had never been able to sit still when lives were on the line. Not then, not now. And as the cabin shook, as children wailed and strangers whispered desperate prayers, she already knew. She was going to the cockpit, even if she had to fight her way forward, because Phoenix didn't surrender to fate. She fought. It, and somewhere above the Colorado sky, with the earth rushing up to meet them, she was about to fight it again. What makes a person stand when everyone else is frozen in fear? What makes a stranger reach for authority in a place where authority already exists? Jennifer Walsh had been a flight attendant for 12 years. She had seen everything: heart attacks. At 40,000 feet, sudden turbulence that made grown men cry, even a lightning strike that left the cabin in eerie silence. But she had never seen panic like this. Not fear in a single form, but a storm of it, breaking differently in every passenger. An elderly woman clutched a rosary. A teenage boy whispered frantic prayers into his phone before his mother yanked it away. A businessman gripped his armrest so tightly his knuckles widened. And somewhere near the back, someone sobbed openly, their voice thin and piercing against the steady rattle of the failing plane. But one woman in 13F sat still, almost too still. Her eyes weren't wide with fear. They were moving, calculating, scanning, watching everything, from the angle of descent to the way passengers were fumbling with oxygen masks. Jennifer's instincts had told her earlier that this passenger wasn't ordinary. Now, as the Boeing jolted again, nose tilting into a sharper descent, those instincts roared. She moved down the aisle, steadying herself with practiced balance as the aircraft shuddered. Masks swung. Children cried. She tried to project calm, but her own heart raced. Seat 13F reached for her arm before she could pass. The grip was firm, controlled, not desperate. "Jennifer," the woman said. She remembered her name. Her voice was low but carried through the chaos like a clean note of steel. "I need to speak to the captain." Jennifer blinked. "Ma'am, please remain seated. The pilots are trained for this." "I'm a pilot." Sarah cut her off. Her words sharp and exact. "United States Air Force. I've flown through hydraulic failures before. Multiple system failures. I can help." Jennifer froze. Regulations screamed in her head. No one in the cockpit, ever. But the aircraft lurched violently again, and the look in Sarah's eyes made her hesitate. This wasn't bravado. It wasn't a passenger panicking and clinging to fantasy. It was something else. A calm she had only ever seen in combat veterans and people who had faced death and refused to flinch. What kind of pilot? Jennifer whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Sarah didn't blink. "Fighter. F-16s. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Call sign Phoenix. The name meant nothing to Jennifer in that moment. But the way Sarah said it, the way she carried it, made. Her chest tightened. Another violent shake. The aisle tilted. Passengers screamed. Jennifer's training warred with her instinct, and instinct won. She reached for her key. Follow me. Sarah moved fast but steady, her presence slicing through the chaos. As they neared the forward galley, she grabbed the intercom handset. Jennifer almost stopped her, but when she heard the tone of her voice, she didn't. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Air Force. Her tone was calm, controlled, impossibly steady. I want you to listen carefully. We're going to get through this, but you need to remain calm and follow crew instructions. The pilots are excellent, and I'm going to help them bring us home. Her words settled over the cabin like a blanket. The panic softened, the crying lowered. Even the college students in the back leaned forward, hope flickering in their eyes. Sarah's hand brushed the businessman's shoulder as she passed. We'll be fine, she said simply, and in that moment he believed her. At the cockpit door, Jennifer's key shook slightly as it turned in the lock. The door opened, and Sarah stepped into the small, pressurized world that would decide all their fates. The scene was instantly familiar and alien all at once, cramped, glowing with instrument panels, and charged with the raw energy of two pilots fighting an impossible battle. Captain Mike Thompson, sweat glistening across his forehead, his hands locked on the yoke. First Officer Elisa Chun, voice tight, running emergency checklists with the speed of someone trying to outrun gravity itself. They barely glanced back at her. They couldn't afford to. Captain, Sarah said, her voice slicing through the noise. Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Air Force. I can help, ma'am. I appreciate it, but Thompson began. Irritation and stress layered into his tone. You've lost primary hydraulics, Sarah said bluntly, eyes scanning the panel with terrifying precision. Backup's failing. You've got 20% response at best. You're using differential thrust just to hold heading. If you keep fighting her like this, you'll have 8 minutes before she becomes unrecoverable. Both pilots froze for a fraction of a second. Her assessment had taken 12 seconds, and every word was right. Thompson looked at her again, this time with something shifting in his eyes. Not disbelief, not irritation, something else. Who did you say you were? Phoenix, Sarah said simply, and for the first time since the emergency began, silence filled the cockpit. Phoenix. The call sign carried weight far beyond one person. In fighter circles, it was a name spoken in the same breath as legends. The pilot who had flown a Falcon home with no hydraulics, the officer whose tactics had saved entire outposts, the woman whose face hung on recruitment posters, but whose true stories were whispered in ready rooms. Captain Thompson's jaw tightened. First Officer Chun stared. The cockpit, for the briefest moment, seemed to shift. Sarah didn't wait for permission. She slid into the jump seat, strapped in, and reached for the headset. Her voice sharpened into the professional cadence of military radio. Denver Center, United 847. Colonel Sarah Martinez, call sign Phoenix, assisting the crew. Request immediate. Vector to nearest runway and full emergency services. The pause on the other end told her everything. Somewhere in Denver's control center, someone was realizing what that name meant. Confirm. Phoenix? The controller asked, voice breaking. Confirmed, Sarah replied, her tone cold and steady. Phoenix on station, ready to work. Behind her, Captain Thompson met her eyes, and though his hands still trembled against the yoke, something new burned there. Trust. Sarah turned back to the instruments. Mike, I need you to let go of flying her by the book. What I'm about to suggest will feel wrong, but it's the only way to save this plane. And for the first time since takeoff, Sarah allowed herself a faint smile. Let Phoenix fly. What happens when a name travels faster than fear? What happens when a single voice on a failing radio reaches the ears of those who once fought beside her, and every man and woman who hears it pauses. At 39,000 feet, the Boeing 757 groaned like a wounded animal. Its body shook, wings flexing with unnatural tension, and every vibration rattled through the bones of 127 passengers who clung to oxygen masks and to each other. But in the cockpit, Sarah Martinez Phoenix was steady. The headset clung to her ear, her voice clipped and exact as she relayed conditions to Denver Center. Captain Mike Thompson still fought the yoke, his muscles straining against the resistant metal. First Officer Lisa Chun read checklist items aloud, her voice tight but steady, each word a lifeline against chaos. Sarah's eyes flicked over the instruments, her brain running patterns, not guesses. Airspeed, angle of attack, hydraulic pressure 0 where there should have been red needles, flickers where there should have been stability. She didn't need to guess what was failing. She knew. Mike, don't fight her. Give me 5 degrees left trim, then hold steady with thrust. He hesitated, then obeyed. The plane shuddered, nose twitching, but steadied slightly. Better, Sarah said, calm as a surgeon. Now, listen carefully. At this descent angle, Denver's 18 minutes away. Too far. We need alternatives. Nearest military field with crash response. Buckley, Peterson, Academy Strip. Somewhere with length and gear to meet us. Denver Center's reply came back after a beat of radio static. The controller's voice carried something that hadn't been there before. Deference. United 847, Denver Center. Copy Phoenix, standby. Phoenix, the name leapt from one console to another, faster than radar. At Peterson Space Force Base, a duty officer froze, headset half off, eyes wide, as he mouthed the call sign to the colonel beside him. Within 90 seconds, secure phones were ringing across 3 installations. At Buckley, Major Kevin Hawk Rodriguez looked up from his briefing binder when the alert came in. The words didn't register at first. Civilian emergency. Requesting fighter. Escort. Phoenix aboard. He read it again, slower. Then his chest tightened. Guardian angel scramble. He barked, already striding for the ready room. His wingman, Captain Amy Viper Chun, looked up. Escort? What's the threat? No threat, Hawk said, pulling his helmet from its cradle. His voice carried something between disbelief and reverence. Phoenix is aboard. She's flying a crippled airliner. Amy stopped mid-motion. Every pilot in the Air Force knew the Phoenix story, or rather, the stories. The sandstorm recovery, the extraction under fire. The day she flew an F-16 home with hydraulics bled out, wings shredded, and still landed. Her legend wasn't one tale, but a mosaic of impossible survivals. And now she was in the cockpit of a United passenger jet within minutes. 2 F-22 Raptors roared off Buckley's runway, their afterburners scorching against the fading Colorado sky. They climbed hard, racing to meet a crippled Boeing that carried not just civilians, but Phoenix herself, back inside the 757. Sarah pressed her palm against the jump seat armrest, feeling every vibration. Her pilot's senses were tuned to the language of failing machines, each shudder telling her a story of metal and stress. Denver Center, United 847, she said, her tone flat and firm. Phoenix transmitting. Be advised, this is not going to be a textbook approach. We're coming in heavy, steep, and probably sideways. Clear me a runway and move everyone else out of the sky. The controller's voice returned, reverent now. United 847, Denver. You're cleared for any runway, any heading, any procedure. All traffic diverted, emergency services standing. By Mike Thompson glanced at her. They don't just say that. They do when they believe you can do the impossible, Sarah said. But her eyes stayed forward. Her expression unreadable. Inside, though, she felt the weight. 1,000 voices from the past. Students she'd trained, wingmen she'd saved, Commanders who'd pinned medals to her chest with the quiet acknowledgement that she'd survived. Where others had not, and now strangers' families, children, businessmen, students were trusting her again, not because they knew her, but because of a name, Phoenix. It felt heavier than rank, heavier than wings. In the cabin, the effect rippled like electricity. Maria Santos, clutching her twin boys, whispered it to the elderly couple beside her. The pilot helping us? She's a colonel, a war hero. The businessman who had been furious about his quarterly projections now sat silent, eyes closed, whispering prayers not for numbers but for survival. The college students repeated the word like a spell. Phoenix? One of them had a brother in the Air Force. He said the name carried the kind of respect reserved for myth. And as passengers traded stories, a shift took hold. Panic dulled. Fear remained, but laced with something else. Hope, built on the quiet strength of a woman who had wanted to be no one, to disappear into anonymity, but who now held there, lives in her calm voice and precise commands. Meanwhile, the world outside the cabin was stirring. At Langley, Colonel Marcus Webb, the man who had once signed Phoenix's commendations, stood frozen in a briefing room as the news came through. His aide's voice cracked. "Sir, United 847, Colonel Martinez is aboard. Hydraulic failure. She's assisting the crew." Marcus shut his eyes, not seeing the gray-haired colonel of today, but the young captain who had once walked into his squadron. Fearless and unshakable. She's still out there, still carrying them home, he thought. At the Air Force Academy, cadets abandoned their classes, crowding into common rooms to tune emergency frequencies. They whispered her call sign like a prayer. At Nellis, at Edwards, as Shaw pilots, maintainers, veterans gathered around radios, each one remembering a time when Phoenix had done the impossible. It wasn't just one airliner in trouble anymore. It was a moment binding generations of warriors. Controllers, ground crews, and ordinary people. And somewhere between heaven and earth, Sarah Martinez kept her eyes forward, her voice steady. "Mike," she said to the captain, "from here on out, think like a test pilot. What I'm about to do is not in your manuals, but it's our only shot." He swallowed hard, sweat dripping, but nodded. For a moment, the cockpit was silent except for the rattle of failing hydraulics, the distant cries of passengers, and the calm, unshakable cadence of Phoenix. She had boarded the United Flight 847 as a weary woman in jeans. Now, she was once again exactly what the world remembered her as, a fighter, and outside, streaking across the sky, two Raptors closed in on the wounded jet guardians, answering not just an emergency call, but the call of a legend. How do you land an aircraft that refuses to listen? How do you carry the weight of 127 souls when every vibration beneath you says the sky is running out of mercy? At 34,000 feet, the Boeing 757 bucked again, shuddering in protest against its own. Broken systems. Captain Mike Thompson's arms ached with the strain of fighting unresponsive controls. First Officer Lisa Chun called out instrument readings in clipped tones, her voice steady though the air itself seemed to unravel around them. And Colonel Sarah Phoenix Martinez sat in the jump seat, headset pressed tight, her gaze locked on every dial, every warning light, every subtle motion of the aircraft's wounded body. Denver Center, Phoenix transmitting. Be advised flight controls degraded. Hydraulic failure confirmed. Manual reversion engaged. We are flying with differential thrust and minimal elevator authority. This approach will not be standard. The reply came back almost instantly, weighted with a kind of reverence. Phoenix, Denver Center copies, runway 16R being cleared. All traffic diverted within 20 miles. Emergency services on full standby. Sarah's lips tightened. She had heard that tone before. Controllers speaking to legends, not just pilots. She didn't care about legend. She cared about physics. Her mind ran through the scenario. The airspeed they would need just to maintain lift without full control surfaces. The descent angle required to bleed energy without stalling. The impossibility of flaring a crippled Boeing the way you'd land. A Falcon. We'll need to fly it on like a brick. She thought, fast, steep, ugly, but alive. Her eyes flicked to Mike. Captain, you've got 23 years with this airline. Ever flown an approach at 180 knots? Not unless I planned on rolling off the far end of the runway, he muttered, sweat dripping down his temples. You will today, Sarah said, for a moment. Silence filled the cockpit except for the rattle of metal and the groan of engines. Pushed beyond comfort. Then, without hesitation, Mike nodded. Tell me what you need. Sarah exhaled. Trust. That was all she needed. Outside, the sky flashed silver. 2 F-22 Raptors eased into formation, sliding alongside the 757 like guardians. Their presence was both alien and deeply reassuring, a symbol that the military itself had arrived, not to fight, but to stand watch. United 847, Hawk Flight has... Visual Phoenix, this is Major Rodriguez. How can we assist? Sarah's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. She remembered Rodriguez's voice. She had trained him once, years ago, back when he was a lieutenant still learning the unforgiving physics of combat flight. Hawk Phoenix, good too. Hear you. We're aiming for Denver International, runway 16R. I need you to coordinate with Tower Clear every foot of concrete they have. We'll be fast, steep, and not pretty. Shadow us down and be ready for worst-case recovery. Copy. All Phoenix, we've got you covered. In the cabin, passengers noticed the fighters first as shadows sliding across the windows. Gasps rippled. Someone whispered, Jets, we've got jets with us. Maria Santos clutched her children tighter, her voice breaking with relief. They're here to protect us. The businessman beside her, Robert Kim, pressed his forehead against the glass, whispering to no one in particular. This is real. This is bigger than us. Word spread row by row. 2 sleek gray Raptors flying formation with their crippled airliner. Not as weapons, as guardians, and in that revelation, fear shifted again into something else. A fragile, trembling hope. But below, the world was moving too. At Denver International Airport, Operations Manager Susan Morrison stood in the command center, headset on, her voice tight as she reported. Over radio, runway 16R is clear. 39 emergency vehicles staged. Fire suppression, crash rescue, hazmat, medical, everyone is in position. National Guard helicopters inbound for medevac if required. The scene outside the terminal looked more like a military operation than a civilian airport. Fire trucks lined the tarmac, ambulances staged in long rows. Cruising gear waiting with jaws tight. CNN, Fox, NBC all had cameras trained on the runway now. Their feeds already broadcasting to millions. And in the Pentagon, a briefing was halted mid-sentence as a duty officer rushed in with an urgent note. The Secretary of the Air Force removed her glasses, reading twice before whispering the name, Phoenix, at Langley. Colonel Marcus Webb stood before a wall of radar screens, his jaw clenched as the blip of United 847 moved steadily toward Denver. Around him, young officers and grizzled veterans alike leaned forward, listening in. That's my pilot up there, Webb said quietly. She's going to bring them home. Back on the plane, Sarah ignored the weight of all those unseen eyes. She had no room for legend, only for numbers. Lisa, I need airspeed callouts every 10 knots once we start descent. Mike, when I say flare, I mean barely. We're not landing. We're flying onto that runway. Do not pull her up more than 2 degrees. She won't listen if you try. Mike swallowed. What happens if we overshoot? Sarah's eyes flicked to him, calm but unflinching. Then we don't overshoot. For a moment, the words hung heavy in the cramped cockpit. Then Mike nodded once, a soldier's acknowledgement. Through the windshield, the Rockies rose in the distance, their snow-capped ridges catching the dying light. The plane shuddered again, its body crying out against every adjustment. Sarah tightened her harness. Denver approach, Phoenix transmitting, beginning descent. And to every frequency now tuned in military and civilian, professional and ordinary, the words carried more than instruction. They carried weight all across the country. People who knew the name pilots, controllers, veterans, families paused to listen to them. Phoenix wasn't just a call sign. It was a promise. And now, with the Earth pulling closer, with 127 lives holding their breath in the cabin behind her, Sarah Martinez was ready to prove that promise one more time. How do you guide a dying aircraft when every muscle, every vibration, every instinct is telling you it wants to fall? How do you keep hope alive when the ground is rushing up and the math says there isn't enough room to stop? The descent toward Denver began like no other. Sarah Martinez's eyes never left the instruments. Her voice was calm, clipped, as she orchestrated the rhythm in the cockpit. Lisa, call out every 10 knots. Mike, steady hands, no overcorrection. She buck, she'll fight you, but let her. The Boeing 757 groaned against the pull of gravity, its frame trembling with each adjustment. Passengers felt the change instantly, ears popping, stomachs lurching, the cabin tilting into a sharper angle than most had ever felt. Children whimpered. Strangers gripped hands. The flight attendants braced silently, their training a shield. Against panic, through the windshield, the Colorado Front Range glowed with the last light of afternoon. Snow-capped ridges caught the sun in gold, but to Sarah they weren't mountains. They were obstacles, hard edges waiting for one mistake. Hawk flight to Phoenix. Major Rodriguez's voice crackled in her headset. Steady, professional. We've got you visual. You're holding steep. Looks stable, but you're high speed. Copy, Sarah replied. We'll keep her hot. Need the speed for control authority. Her words sounded almost casual, but every second carried razor's edge. Risk. Too fast, and they'd blast past Denver's runways with no way to stop. Too slow, and the wounded bird would stall, dropping from the sky like dead weight behind her. Mike's knuckles gleamed white on the yoke. Feels wrong, he muttered through clenched teeth. It should, Sarah answered. Everything about this is wrong. Trust the math. Trust me. Lisa's voice cut in. Airspeed 210. Good, Sarah said. Bleed it slow. In the cabin, the shift was palpable. The earlier chaos had given way to a tense, collective silence. Even the children sensed it. The businessman sat motionless now, lips moving silently in prayer. Maria Santos rocked her twins, whispering words she wasn't sure she believed, but spoke anyway. We're almost home. We're almost safe. Jennifer Walsh stood in the aisle, steady despite the shuddering airframe. Her eyes kept flicking to seat 13 empty now, she whispered under her breath. Bring them home, Phoenix, please. Outside. The escorting Raptors angled lower, their sleek frames casting shadows over the Boeing's fuselage. To passengers peering through small oval windows, they looked like angels of steel holding formation, guardians guiding them through hostile skies. And on the ground, Denver prepared. 39 emergency vehicles lined runway 16R. Fire trucks stood ready, foam cannons armed. Ambulances idled with doors open, medics gripping stretchers, their eyes fixed on the horizon. State Patrol blocked every perimeter road, and beyond the fence lines, civilians gathered. Airport staff, airline workers, even retired pilots who had raced to the terminal after hearing the name whispered on emergency frequencies. Phoenix, the news had broken wide. CNN carried a live feed of the descending radar blip. Social media lit with hashtags. Hashtag Phoenix 847. Hashtag Bring Them Home. Military families in base housing across the country huddled around radios. Cadets at the academy stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. At Langley, at Nellis, at Edwards, pilots listened, as if they were in the cockpit themselves. And at Boeing, Sarah's world narrowed to three things. Speed, angle, and trust. 2,000 feet, Lisa called. Airspeed 190. Perfect, Sarah said, though her voice was low, measured. Mike, start shallowing the descent. She resist, but ease her. The captain obeyed. The yoke pushed back like stubborn muscle. The aircraft fought. Sarah placed her hand lightly over his, guiding, not taking, but steadying. Let her breathe. Don't yank, coax. For a second, the nose responded. A small victory in a battle. Where inches mattered more than medals. 1,000 feet, speed 185. The runway was visible now, gray concrete, stretched against the orange glow of dusk. Lined with flashing lights, emergency vehicles dotting its edges like sentinels. Sarah's pulse steadied. She had seen this view before, in different cockpits, in different wars. But this was heavier. Not soldiers, not Marines. Families, children. Strangers who had boarded expecting nothing more than a routine flight. And all of them counting on her. 500 feet, speed 180. Sarah's voice dropped into the calm that had earned her the call sign Phoenix. Mike, flare it. 50. 2 degrees only. Lisa, call out down to the ground. No distractions. The runway rose fast. Too fast. Engines roared in reverse thrust. Fighting physics, the frame trembled, nose pitching slightly as Mike fought the instinct to pull harder. 50 feet, Lisa said. Flare, now, Sarah commanded. Mike eased, too gentle. And Sarah's hand pressed firmer against his. Hold steady, let her down. The wheels slammed harder than any textbook landing. A jarring crash that rattled every seat and sent gasps rippling through the cabin. But they were down. For one. Breathless second, silence. Then Sarah snapped back. Reverse thrust. Max Lisa. Speed callouts. Engines screamed, their thunder tearing against the air. The plane shook violently as thrust reversed. Brakes straining against non-existent hydraulics. 90 knots, Lisa shouted. 80. 70. Outside, fire trucks paced them, red lights flashing in perfect sync with the blur of white fuselage. Inside, passengers gripped hands, closed eyes, whispered thanks. 60. 50. Sarah's eyes locked on the far end of the runway rushing. Closer, more thrust, more don't let go. 40, 30, 20. And then the plane shuddered, momentum fading, wheels grinding against unforgiving concrete. At last, the roar softened. The vibration lessened. The nose dipped. Gently forward, 10 knots. 5. Silence. The Boeing 757 rolled to a complete stop just 800 yards short of the runway's end. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the cabin erupted, cheers, sobs, prayers colliding into a single roar of human relief. Parents hugged children. Strangers embraced. Even the businessman wept openly, hands covering his face. In the cockpit, Captain Thompson sagged back, sweat soaking his shirt. His voice cracked. I've flown 23 years. I've never seen. Sarah cut him off softly. Team effort, Mike. You flew her. Lisa read her. I just consulted, but her hands trembled faintly where no one could see. Outside, emergency vehicles swarmed. Fire crews foamed the wheels. Medics prepared to board. On the horizon, the Raptors banked away, their mission complete. And as Sarah unstrapped her harness, she finally allowed herself one deep breath. Not relief, not pride, something quieter. Responsibility, because landing was only part of it. Keeping them safe until every soul stepped onto the ground. That was the mission. Always. What does survival look like when the wheels finally stop moving? Is it cheers, tears, or silence that tells you what it costs to come home? For a moment after the Boeing 757 rolled to a halt, the world was still. Not silent engines whined in their cool down. Hydraulic pumps groaned uselessly. Emergency sirens wailed from a distance. But inside, In the cabin where 124 passengers sat strapped in, it felt like silence, a silence made of disbelief. They were alive. Then it broke. Applause, sobs, a thunder. Of voices clashing together, joy, relief, raw gratitude. Parents clutched children as though they'd never let go. Strangers embraced without hesitation. Maria Santos wept openly as her twin boys laughed, not fully understanding, their voices piercing through with the innocence of survival. Jennifer Walsh, her composure gone, pressed her forehead to the galley wall and whispered, "Thank you, God." "Thank you, Phoenix." In the cockpit, Mike Thompson leaned back in his seat, drenched in sweat, chest heaving, his voice trembled. "I've flown 23 years, and I've never—" His words cracked, broke. Sarah cut him off gently. "Mike, you flew her." Lisa read her. "I just helped you listen." But even as she spoke, her own hands trembled faintly. Hidden in her lap, she didn't want them to see. Didn't want them to know how close the abyss had truly felt. Outside, the tarmac came alive. Emergency vehicles swarmed. Fire crews foamed the wheels. Medics ran. Stretchers up portable stairs. Police cordons locked down the runway. Lights flashed red, white, and blue across the falling dusk. And then something else. Through the cockpit window, Sarah saw movement. A line forming on the tarmac. Uniforms. Not just first responders, military. Airmen, officers, some in dress blues, some in flight suits. Others still in fatigues, as though they had driven straight from base housing. A formation was building. "Colonel." Jennifer's voice cracked at the cockpit door. She was crying now, her professional mask gone. "There are people outside. They want to see you." Sarah hesitated. She had worn anonymity like armor when she boarded. Just a woman in 13F. She hadn't wanted anyone to see her. Not as Phoenix, not as a hero. Just Sarah, a daughter flying home to visit her mother, but anonymity had burned away somewhere in the thin air above the Rockies. She stood. Her knees felt weak, not from fear but from the weight of what waited outside when the main cabin door opened. A rush of cool air and sirens swept in. The first passengers descended the portable stairs, a mother holding her son's hand, an elderly couple gripping each other as if for the first time. Reporters' cameras clicked, lights flashed, and then silence fell. Because at the base of the stairs, lined along the tarmac, were rows of military personnel. Major Kevin Rodriguez stood at the front in his flight suit, helmet still tucked beneath one arm, his eyes locked forward. Beside him, his wingman captain, Amy Viper Chun, mirrored his posture. Behind them stretched dozens more active duty. Retired veterans, guard, reserve. Some had flown with her. Some had only heard her stories. But all stood in formation, waiting. When Sarah appeared at the doorway, the air seemed to shift. "Colonel Sarah Phoenix Martinez," Rodriguez called, his voice crisp with ceremony. "On behalf of the United States Air Force, we request permission to render honors." Sarah froze. Emotions surged sharp and unexpected, threatening to break her composure. She swallowed, steadied her voice. Permission granted, in perfect sequence. Rodriguez snapped to attention and saluted. Amy followed. Then the line behind them, one by one, like dominoes falling. Every uniformed figure on that tarmac rose into salute. Dress blues, flight suits, fatigues, young cadets, gray-haired veterans. Each one standing straight, hand to brow, in recognition not just of the landing, not just of survival, but of a lifetime of Phoenix. Sarah's own arm rose. Crisp, exact. The salute drilled into her bones since she was 18. She held it, the dusk painting shadows across her face, until the moment stretched into eternity. Behind the military, civilians stood two airport staff, airline workers, passengers from other flights who had been delayed. Some wept, others held up phones, recording what they instinctively knew was history. And for the first time all day, Sarah felt the tremor in her chest break free. Not fear, not adrenaline, something older, a recognition that she had tried so hard to escape anonymity, only to be pulled back into a spotlight she had never sought. When the salute ended, the line broke. Faces came forward. Master Sergeant Tony Castellanos, older now, but still steady, stepped up first. "Colonel, it's an honor to see you again. You haven't changed, still making the impossible look easy." Captain Janet Spike Williams came next. Once a wide-eyed lieutenant Sarah had trained, now an instructor herself. "Ma'am, I teach cadets the story of your sandstorm recovery. Today, I'll tell them I saw you do it again." Chief Rodriguez, the senior enlisted from her Afghanistan squadron, spoke simply. "Phoenix, you brought us all home then. You brought them home today. Some things never change." Each word hit heavier than the last. And yet, the moment that undid her wasn't from the Air Force. It was an 8-year-old boy. Danny Wilson slipped from his mother's hand and walked forward with fearless curiosity. He stared up at her with wide eyes. "Ma'am, are you really a fighter pilot?" Sarah knelt, knees creaking, so their eyes met. For the first time, her voice softened, stripped of command. "I am, Danny. And today I got to help Captain Thompson and First Officer Chun fly your airplane home. Safe. My dad says fighter pilots are the bravest people in the world." The boy continued, his voice small but clear. "Are you brave?" Sarah paused. The tarmac, the cameras, the rows of uniforms all faded for a moment. She answered him the only way she could. "I think brave people are just regular people who do what needs to be done when others are counting on them. Today, everyone on that plane was brave. Your mom, the flight crew, the passengers, we all worked together." Danny nodded seriously, then held out his crumpled boarding pass. "Will you sign this?" Sarah smiled, tears threatening but controlled. She pulled a pen from her pocket. "To Danny, remember, heroes are ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. Aim high, call. Sarah Phoenix Martinez, USF," when she handed it back. Danny grinned as though he held treasure, and maybe he did around them. Passengers began approaching one by one. Maria Santos wanted her sons to meet the lady pilot. Robert Kim, the businessman, shook her hand with tears streaming down his face. The college students begged for a photo. Each carried their own piece of the legend now, woven into their lives forever. Sarah listened, nodded, smiled when she could, but inside the weight pressed heavy. She had bored as no one. She was leaving as Phoenix again, not because of medals or myths, but because in the moment between disaster and survival, she had remembered what service meant. Not the uniform, not the rank, the choice, the responsibility, the refusal to look away when others needed her. And on that tarmac, surrounded by people who would never forget her name, Sarah Martinez finally allowed herself to breathe. What happens when a moment becomes larger than the person who lived it? When the world decides you're a symbol, but inside you're just a soul trying to breathe. 3 days after United Flight 847 rolled to a stop at Denver International, Sarah Martinez sat alone in her mother's kitchen. The linoleum floor hadn't changed in 20 years. The same ceramic rooster still perched on the counter, watching silently as if nothing in the world had shifted. But outside those walls, everything had. The news hadn't just reported the emergency landing. It had consumed it. CNN ran the headline. "Phoenix returns. Female fighter pilot saves 127 lives." Fox called her the woman in 13F. NBC used grainy cell phone footage of her stepping onto the tarmac, overlaying commentary about courage and calm under fire. Social media burned with clips of the salute, the boy with the boarding pass, the roar of passengers clapping. In the days that followed, Sarah's name trended worldwide. Veterans groups called her the definition of service. Airline unions praised her as proof of teamwork. Cadets at the Air Force Academy held vigils, lighting candles under the statue of the unknown airman and whispering her call sign into the night. Phoenix, she hadn't asked for it, hadn't wanted it. But legends rarely belong to the people who live them. Her phone buzzed endlessly reporters. Senators, generals, even late-night hosts who wanted her for interviews. Emails poured in from strangers thanking her for saving loved ones. Families sent letters with shaky handwriting and pressed flowers, trying to give shape to their gratitude. And still, Sarah sat in her mother's kitchen, staring at the steam rising from a chipped coffee mug. She didn't feel like a savior, didn't feel like a legend. She felt tired. Her mother, Elena, shuffled into the room, gray hair pinned back, her slippers whispering against the floor. She set a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You haven't eaten," Elena said softly. "I'm not hungry," Sarah murmured. "You never are after missions," Elena replied, her voice carrying both love and ache. "Even when you were younger, you came home empty, like you'd left something in the sky." Sarah's throat tightened. Her mother didn't know all the stories, couldn't, but she knew enough to see the cost behind her daughter's silence. "Elena," Sarah whispered, slipping into her mother's first name without thinking, the way she had as a teenager when she wanted truth. "Why do they keep looking at me like I'm more than I am?" Her mother bent, pressed her forehead gently against Sarah's temple. "Because when people are afraid, they look for someone who doesn't flinch. You didn't flinch, Mia. That's all it takes for them to believe in you." The words landed heavy, not wrong, not unkind, just true. Meanwhile, the world refused to quiet. Every passenger from 847 was interviewed. Maria Santos cried on live TV as she described holding her boys and hearing Sarah's voice over the intercom. "We're going to bring you home." Robert Kim confessed that he had prayed for the first time in 20 years. The college students waved their selfie with her, laughing and crying at the same time. Airlines discussed adding Phoenix protocols to their emergency training, using her calm cadence as a model for how to stabilize passenger morale. And at Buckley Air Force Base, Rodriguez and Viper were debriefed, their words already woven into an official report. Phoenix's presence in the cockpit stabilized crew performance and enabled unconventional but effective recovery procedures. That phrase, "enabled unconventional recovery," began appearing in Pentagon memos. Some wanted her back in uniform. Some wanted her in classrooms, teaching cadets. Others whispered she should be in Washington, shaping policy. But Sarah, she wanted none of it. On the 7th day after Denver, she walked alone to a park at the edge of her hometown. Children played on swings, their laughter sharp in the cold air. A jogger passed with earbuds in, oblivious, and Sarah sat on a bench, staring at nothing. She thought of Danny Wilson, the boy with the boarding pass, of the way he had asked, "Are you brave?" and how the question had lingered in her chest ever since. She thought of the passengers' faces, of Mike and Lisa in the cockpit, their eyes wide but steady when she told them to trust her, and she thought of the silence in those final seconds. Before touchdown, the silence where she had realized she wasn't flying for glory, for legend, or for memory. She was flying for them, for ordinary people who wanted to live ordinary lives. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from General Webb. "Academy commencement in 6 months. The cadets requested you as keynote. Please consider. They want to hear Phoenix." She stared at the text, her chest heavy. 6 months. Time to disappear again. Time to resist. But would she? She remembered what Elena had said. People look for someone who doesn't flinch. She hadn't flinched at 39,000 feet. She couldn't now. The weeks stretched, and the story didn't fade. It grew. Documentaries pitched. Publishers called. Veterans halls invited her to speak. Cadets mailed letters begging for advice. Sarah kept declining, politely, firmly, but the academy request lingered like an unanswered frequency. And at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside carried on, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing Danny's voice. "Are you brave?" She didn't know the answer, not yet, but she knew she would have to face it. Why do cadets look to the stage with eyes so wide? Is it the promise of wings, the weight of oaths, or the hope that someone ahead of them has carried the burden and still stands tall? 6 months after Denver, the Air Force Academy sat beneath a sky so clear it seemed painted. Rows upon rows of cadets in dress blues filled Falcon Stadium, their posture sharp, their faces youthful but marked with the gravity of the day. Families filled the stands, banners waved, and brass bands polished their notes with military precision. But the air carried a hum anticipation not just for diplomas, not just for rank, but for her. Colonel Sarah Phoenix Martinez. She hadn't wanted to come. Every instinct had pulled her back to quiet, to staying in shadows. But the letter from the cadets had tipped her balance. They hadn't asked for a legend. They had asked for her voice. So here she was, in service dress uniform, ribbons neat but understated, call signs stitched invisible beneath the fabric. General Webb stepped to the microphone first, introducing her with words that blurred in her ears. Commendations, history, the Denver flight, the salute. She heard them as echoes. What mattered was the silence that fell when she rose from her chair and walked toward the podium. Thousands of eyes followed her, cameras too, but in her mind, she carried only the image of a boy with a boarding pass, asking a question that had haunted her nights. Are you brave? She reached the microphone, paused, looked over the sea of uniforms, and when she spoke, her voice was steady low, stripped of ceremony. 6 months ago, I was just a passenger in seat 13F. The crowd stilled. No one had expected her to begin. There. I wasn't wearing wings. I wasn't in uniform. I wasn't there as Phoenix. I was there as Sarah. Tired, a little restless, hoping to get home without being noticed. And then, everything changed. Her eyes lifted, gaze sweeping the cadets. You know the story. You've heard the headlines. But here's the truth. I wasn't the only one who made that landing possible. The captain held the yoke with muscles screaming. The first officer read the numbers when fear could have stolen her voice. The flight attendants walked that cabin, holding families together. The passengers trusted strangers with their lives. Survival wasn't mine, it was ours. She let the words hang, soft but sharp. In combat, in the air. In life, people will tell you heroism is about glory, about medals, about names carved in marble. But I've lived long enough to know better. Heroism is quieter. It's the flight attendant who steadies a crying child. It's the wingman who answers your call in a storm. It's the mother who whispers hope to her sons when she's afraid to. A pause, a breath. On that runway in Denver, when the plane stopped, I looked out and saw hundreds of uniforms saluting. And I struggled with that, because I don't feel like what they saluted. I never have. Every time they've called me Phoenix, I've wanted to remind them I'm just Sarah, a person who's been afraid, who's been broken, who's carried loss. The only difference is that when the moment came, I couldn't look away. I couldn't let others carry the weight alone. She gripped the podium lightly, her voice softening further. Cadets, you will go into a world that will ask you to carry weight too. Sometimes in cockpits, sometimes in offices, sometimes in places no one will ever see, and you will wonder. If you are brave enough, let me tell you, bravery isn't about not feeling fear. Bravery is feeling it, owning it, and still choosing to act because others are counting on you. Her eyes found the front row, where cadets leaned forward as if trying to catch every breath between her words. When people called me Phoenix, I used to resist. I thought it was about survival, about flames and ashes. But I've come to realize it isn't about me at all. Phoenix isn't a person. It's a reminder that from failure, from fear, from near disaster, you can still rise. You can still bring others with you, and that is your mission. Not medals. Not myth, people. Always people. Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. I stand here today not to tell you I am brave. I'm not sure I am. But I can tell you what I told a little boy 6 months ago. Brave people aren't special. They're ordinary people who choose to do what's needed in the moment they're called. And that means any one of you, on any day, in any seat, even seat 13F, can be brave. Silence, heavy, reverent. Thousands of cadets holding their breath, and then, without instruction, without ceremony, they rose. Every cadet in Falcon Stadium stood to their feet, backs straight, eyes fixed on her. It wasn't applause. It wasn't cheers. It was something else. A wordless recognition, a salute. Sarah's chest tightened. She hadn't expected it, didn't want it. But in that moment, she understood. It wasn't about her. It was about them, about what they wanted to become, slowly. She raised her hand, crisp and precise, returned the salute, held it. For a moment, the stadium was timeless cadets, generals, families, civilians, all bound together not by legend, but by choice. The choice to act when others needed them. When she finally lowered her hand, the silence broke into thunder cheers, applause, the roar of thousands honoring not just Phoenix, but the idea she had carried. Sarah stepped back from the podium, her heart both heavy and light. She knew she would retreat again into quieter spaces. That was who she was, but she also knew something else now. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the world remembers not because you wanted them to, but because, in a moment that mattered, you didn't flinch.